All right, let's do a little talk about resistances. They said they're going to do some changes in Season 2, and there's a couple ways they could go about it, and one way that they could do it is obviously a lot worse. So first and foremost, armor contributes to 50% of the damage you take from non-physical sources, right? So armor still reduces the damage you take from poison, lightning, cold, yada yada. What they could do is make this worse and almost have you want to focus on and require resistances in your character to actually be able to play it effectively, right? If they make this too bad, or if they nerf this in any form at all it's really going to do is just make the game harder and make your character worse. I think this is a problem because resistances have a very limited amount of slots they can be on. You have them on your necklaces and rings. You cannot have them on gloves, as far as I know. I don't think you can. But you can have helm, chest, legs, and boots. Now, if you look at the kinds of rolls you can get on these items, are you really going to want to give up flat damage reduction or life for resistance? Like, I could give up that killing elite damage for a resistance, but I would realistically rather have damage from distant, flat damage reduction, right? On boots, I could maybe give up stats, but there's other things I could have. Like, what if I could have all stat, I could have, something I think is a little slept on is dodge from distant enemies. I have a pair of boots in my stash, I can show you that stat. See, like, dodge chance from distant enemies, I think that stat's actually pretty good. Personally, I like it, but I don't know how well it works in practice. But realistically, you might have helm and boots as a slot where you would potentially want resistances or could take resistances without reducing the amount of damage you take or without reducing the damage you do, right? Because taking something like Fury Cost away is pretty significant for a Berserker, and we obviously aren't going to lose that stat. We're not going to take away that stat. Move speed is as much mitigation as armor is, because obviously not getting hit is better than being hit in the first place. So if they nerf this armor contribution and make these resistances look way more valuable because of that, I think that's a really poor way to do it, and I think it would be a net negative to the game as a whole. Now, how I would prefer them to change resistances is that each resistance, as you can see, reduces the amount of fire damage. This applies to both direct damage and burning damage. Reduces cold, reduces lightning, reduces poison, reduces shadow. I think these are pretty lame currently, and I think these resistances should actually do a little more. Poison and fire, for example, because you can have a burning effect or a poison effect on your character that deals damage over time. I think any damage over time effect should not only be... the resistance should not only reduce if this was the whole scale of the poison, right? Resistance should not only reduce the amount of damage you take from the poison, like the initial application. For Berserkers, it's actually pretty problematic when you're fighting a bunch of, like, poison spiders, because you kill them, and because you're in melee range, when you kill them, you just get poison, right? And at higher difficulties, you take a significant amount of poison damage, regardless of if the enemy is poison enchanted. I think poison enchanted, when they hit you, they leave a pool of poison, which also does a crazy amount of damage, right? So I think what resistances should do is, on top of already reducing that kind of damage, it should take a chunk of that. Let's say this number reduces the amount of poison you take by 20%. What if instead of taking the whole thing from poison, it also chops off 20% of that overall application on top of reducing the damage of the remaining application, right? You could do the same thing for fire. It would make it way better. Lightning is kind of weird because lightning's more just flat damage, so maybe you could up... because they already have it here where it ups the amount of damage. But I think it's still kind of equal to the percentage I have. But you could up the amount of damage that you reduce from lightning, because, for example, you have, like, lightning touched, lightning sphere, or you have lightning touch, shock lance, and electric obelisk, all things which can kill you super easily, and all things which, as a melee, are a lot more difficult to deal with. So I, as a character, would probably like poison resistance and lightning resistance, right? Because I'm going to be taking a lot more damage from those sources because I'm in melee. Cold, I think what they should do is, yeah, reduce the damage, but it should also reduce the buildup and duration of freezing effects on you. I, as a berserker, have a lot of unstoppable mechanics in my class, so I don't have to worry about cold as much, but I do have to worry about stuff like lightning and poison, and even shadow to an extent for that kind of thing. But there's classes like that I've seen, like Necro or Druid. I have seen videos of these classes literally being frozen for like 30 to 40 seconds straight. They come out of a freeze and then instantly get refrozen again, and they basically can't fucking hit any buttons, they can't play the game, and they just slowly whittle away and die over like 30 to 40 seconds. And if you're being hit by something for 40 seconds, you should probably be able to kill it instead of it killing you, just because you're fucking frozen solid. So I think what cold resistance should do is also reduce the buildup and freeze duration on your character. That way, it actually provides a benefit to those classes. I wouldn't want cold resist because I can deal with it. Other classes can't. So I think what resistances realistically should be is it allows whatever your character has a problem dealing with, or even if you as a player have a problem dealing with a certain mechanic and you don't want to deal with it as much, put some resistances on there, right? It'll be good. But that's if they buff how these resistances work and how they interact. They could, like I said, obviously make armor do less. Well, they could actually kind of do a couple. They could make armor do less and resistances do more, making them more valuable, but I think reducing the amount of armor contribution would probably have more of a negative effect on the game as a whole, especially for more casual players. So I think what they really should do is just change or buff what these things actually do. For example, it's like, oh, we didn't mention Shadow. Well, Shadow has the daze mechanic. If you've ever had your screen go black, go dark on the corners, and then you can't hit any buttons, you can't press anything, that is the daze mechanic. And I'm pretty sure that's attributed to Shadow. So, alongside the other things, I think what Shadow could be is, depending on your resistance, you might actually have a short grace period, right, of, let's say, anywhere between 0.1 and maybe even like half a second or something. Or it can go up a little more, right? But it should give you a grace period before it makes your character unable to act, right? Because you're obviously resisting that shadow influence, that shadowy influence, that daze, right? So that's maybe what Shadow could be. But I think realistically what they really should be doing is, instead of nerfing what armor does for your character, they really need to buff kind of how your character interacts with the game with these resistances. I think it would make it a lot better. Classes that can't deal with freeze, for example, could do cold, yada yada. I'm kind of rambling at this point. But the other thing on top of that, which I think is something to consider, is... what was I going to say? Honestly, I don't even remember. I had an idea. It's gone now. So, that's kind of it, really. It's basically, please buff these, make them good, and then also, when making them good, you can, because you can choose what resistances you want on your gear, you can stylize your character towards something else. So, let's say if, as a Berserker, I actually wanted to play less unstoppable, I want to use maybe a different ult instead of Wrath of the Berserker for even more unstoppable. I could use something different. Maybe Iron Maiden, something. A skill that I've literally never seen anybody use ever. So maybe it would allow me to use different things if I decided, you know what, I want resistance against cold. Oh yeah, I remember what I was going to say. I'll do a whole other kind of topic about it, but I think ranged mobs are kind of out of control in this game in terms of what they do. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you have a good one, and if you have any other ideas for what resistances could be, let me know. Peace.